Is this on? Is this thing on? Hello. Hello. Okay. Hello. One assumes that one is live currently. Coming at you on this fine Monday morning, which I'm hoping is going to be a more regular time for me to do these kind of live sessions. Not necessarily at this particular time. I don't even know what time I said this thing was supposed to go live. I probably should stick to more of my own schedule. uh, but yeah, I haven't been doing that. So I'll try to pay attention to that. But for anyone who is paying attention, uh, we got next Monday coming up here on the 4th. I'll be talking with Gualtiero Piccinini about computation and all of that stuff. So that will be good. Hello, Adam Kennedy. Yes, you're saying yes. What's yes to? Yes, just yes, generally. Oh, man. I'm in a silly mood. I just got back. Actually, it's kind of been of a rough day today, to be honest with you, for many reasons. Some of them family related, some of them world related, but generally speaking, today's been a bit tough. But I did get out and get to skateboard a bit, so that was nice. And I just got back. Um, really trying to get these backside airs, guys. You guys, I can do early grabs, but I want to do an actual backside air. So I'm working on that. And it's a whole thing about overcoming one's fear. Because I know I can do it. In fact, every time I almost do it, I like freak out and jump off my skateboard. I'm going to get it though. It's just a matter of sticking with it, hopefully. We'll see. Okay. I see I never got a response to what the yes business was about. Um, okay, so what else is going on? I mentioned Gualtiero uh, for next Monday, and that should be interesting. He's got like two books. I've been reading both of them, rereading them. Remember, reading is always rereading, as we like to say, because I read them once a long time ago, and then recently, and now I'm reading again. But they're very interesting. And Gualtiero, if you don't know him, he manages that or managed for a long time the Brains blog, a group blog on the philosophy of mind, and that's where I got my start in blogging. Oh, those many moons ago, when I was a youngster who was new to all this stuff. So I've never met Gualtiero in person, I don't think, now that I'm thinking about it. But I've known him in that way for a long time and been aware of his work and stuff like that. So he's got some interesting things to say about computation and how the brain might compute and what its relation to consciousness may be and stuff like that. So those are all the good things that we like to talk about uh, over here. But anyway, so I don't really have a goal or a plan for these kind of office hour sessions. I usually just hang out until someone asks me a question or something like that, or wants to argue or chat about something. Guess I'm feeling a little bit ornery today. Ornery? So I'll try to watch myself a bit, but don't want to becoming too argumentative for no reason. Okay, so what does one generally do while one waits to see if anyone's going to come around? What I normally would do is go around and hang around on YouTube. Speaking of which, I did notice going around, and also speaking of being ornery, I did notice showing up in YouTube various videos of my former self. I saw three videos. I guess T Jump's been posting all the videos of his past discussions or something like that. So I saw him post, I think, three videos of how many times did I talk with T Jump? I think I talked with him like 5 times. 5 times? Did I? I don't remember. I'd have to go back and look. Anyway, so, and I saw that there's another one that he's gonna be posting relatively soon. And then I also saw, why, I don't know why they're showing me these videos. I guess maybe the universe is suggesting that I should react to them and refute myself. I did watch part of one that I saw, but it's hard for me to listen to myself because um, of hearing one's own self is very annoying. So anyway, but I see Victor is asking a question, and I want to talk about that. But um, just to finish my thought, I saw also a couple of other videos of myself. So not to mention the 5,000 T-jump videos, which are questionable, but also I saw one with me and Kane Baker, and then one with me and Lance Independent, he calls himself. So these old videos of myself, I'm not always 100%. I don't always stand by 100% how I conducted myself in these past videos. And I guess I would say, if I was being honest, that I'm not especially proud of the fact that some of these people annoyed me and that I let it get to me in a way. So that showed me something about myself, which kind of led to this current view that I have actually about how you ought to engage online, and the way in which these kinds of discussions might be most productive, because I felt myself being sucked into this other way, a way that felt natural and like, you know, how shall one put it, towards the dark side. And I want to resist that. So I do, maybe I should watch those old videos and watch face to face my old self and confront these kind of things that I wish were better, and so forth. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay. So have I read Block's new book? Yes, I have read Block's new book. Sorry, I'm typing. What is Block's book called? I always forget this, even though someone just recently brought this up. The border between seeing and thinking, or something like that. And I think it's a good book. It's interesting to me that this is the first book that he's written, which I was kind of blown away when I thought about it. Ned's been around for a long time, since the 80s, and he's edited a couple of like really influential books. I think there's 3 or 4 that he's been involved in. So that one on the nature of consciousness, which is the one that exposed me to all this stuff that he edited with Guvendor or something like that. And who else was Owen Flanagan, I think, was also editor of that. And then earlier one about the nature of mental imagery that he edited. And then he has 2 collected volumes of papers or something. But he hasn't written a full-on traditional like monograph where you just write the whole book. So that was interesting to me, that so late in his career, he felt the need to do this. And also it was personally frustrating to me, not that any one of you guys asked about this. Thank you, Cass. What the heck? Scramdra? What? Okay. But yes, exactly. Thanks for suggesting that name. However, when I was working with Hakwon Lau, we were writing our paper. Oh, is this? Thank you, Adam. Oh, I get it now. I was live right then. Oh my goodness. I'm a moron. Yes, me, professional moron. Okay. So when I was working with Hakwon, and we were writing our paper, which became The Emperor's New Phenomenology, that's the main title of it. And then I guess the main title is The Empirical Case for Consciousness Without First Order Representations. I forget what the technical name of it is. Anyway, when we were working on that paper, which was like in 2011, 2010, and Ned was supposed to respond to us, and then instead he wrote this book. And then after this book was finished, then he responded to us, and that's why this thing got published in 2019. And even though it was like 9 years later, so I was like, come on, man. I was trying to. Anyway, okay, so, but still, I'm glad he wrote the book. And the philosophy of perception, it really does encapsulate his views. Scrams is okay, really. In the hardcore scene, to refer to real screamo. I can't see it. There's something in the way. Screamo? Okay. Hardcore, see, man, I'm too old for that stuff. But I know in the old days, I was just listening to Biohazard and Sick of It All this morning. Are they count as the hardcore? I guess that's old school hardcore. Anyway, don't derail. I'm getting to get totally derailed here. Okay, so the block book, yes, and in fact, I'm still trying to get Ned to commit to coming on to this show. He has said he will, and we are trying to schedule a date. And I think he was at the APA, which was in New Orleans, the American Philosophical Association. I think it just ended a couple days ago. So I don't know. These people travel around a lot. These guys that are famous and have, time on their hands. So I'm trying to get him to commit to a time to talk about this. And I assume that we will talk largely about the book that he has. I think it's interesting, and the whole approach that he has is one that I think is interesting and generally supportive of. In the book, he kind of he comes at me and Hakwan and other people in my on my team in my camp with some interesting arguments, and in particular, the one that I think that he takes the most seriously, or not the most seriously, but one that when I saw him, he said, "You guys need to say something about this." Was his argument about infants and whether or not they well, he has an argument that they are able to perceive colors as evidenced by their looking time. And you can do various experiments, which if anyone's interested, we could talk about, which suggests that they are more surprised when their color expectations aren't met. But at the same time, you can show stuff that suggests that these infants are not using color concepts in their working memory or short-term reasoning, problem solving. So they're not like thinking about whether it's red or something like that, but they can tell that it's red. That's kind of his idea. The main argument, as far as I can tell, of the whole book is that there's this kind of distinction between the kind of sensory system and the kind of format and content that it generates, and the cognitive system and the format and content that it generates, and that there is a clear like border between these two. So, yeah. So his claim then is that in this case of the infants, they can tell the difference, which suggests that they have a conscious experience, but they don't conceptualize it under the concept, which suggests that something like the higher order thought theory isn't going to capture what's going on in that case. My response is to think that actually might be a good an argument against certain views, but it's also not clear to me that you need to think of them as having the higher order states that characterize those first order things in the right way. So it may be that they simply are aware of it as a color, but not in respect of what kind of color it is. So they may have a different kind of experience. So that I think it's less convincing, or that there is something you can say, basically, that they have a conscious experience of the color, but not of it as being, the way we would conceive of it or something. So, but Stephen is saying, would love to hear Block asked about his views on cognitive phenomenology and how his view of qualia have evolved over time. I know, okay, that's a good question. How can there be a cognitive qualia if qualia are non-representational? Now, so, okay, I'm not blocked, but I don't know if that's, so if he thinks there's cognitive qualia. So the way I understand Block's view, which I mean, hopefully we'll be able to ask him about, and we can all talk about it. But the way I understand his view is that consciousness, phenomenal consciousness, and I think it definitely has evolved from the old days, but that, as I understand it now, in the old days of the 90s is what I mean, when he had the mustache. Parentheses, go and watch that Quine video with Ned, because the mustache and the shoulder pads and the part in his hair is Classic. Okay, so his view is that phenomenal consciousness is just what it's like. So it's what it's like for the organism, and there's this kind of general property that it's like something for us. And then there are the sensory components and the cognitive components, the specific components and the generic components. So he's open to there being abstract generic phenomenology, cognitive phenomenology, first order phenomenology, and all these different kinds of things that characterize what it's like for us. But I wouldn't say that he thinks of those things as qualia. Although now that I'm thinking about it, it is a good question. What he would say about those kinds of things, and he doesn't talk about it too much. So I think Stephen's got onto a good question here. But the non-representational bit, yes. So it's first of all, he does think that these things are representational, but not essentially so. So that that many of these things are representational, but just like on a map, you may use a certain color to represent the height of a certain mountain, and certain shading values represent, depth or whatever. Those things in and of themselves represent the height of the mountains. But I'm sorry, those things do come to represent the height of the mountains, but in and of themselves, they don't. They're just colors. And I think that's the way that Block kind of thinks about these things. But yes, that's a good question. I'm going to have to keep that one in mind. Anyway, so my long-winded way of trying to parse your question is I don't think he would say that there's cognitive qualia. There's cognitive what it's likeness. But how would that get explained? And how does that relate to this idea that there is a kind of non-representational level of phenomenal consciousness? Those are good questions. Yeah. Someone wants to study philosophy at the research level. Yes, it's difficult and very competitive, but I felt the same way. And you can do it if you work hard enough, I feel like, but who knows? I also, had a lot of accidental privileges and so forth. But when I was, I started out at community college and transferred to a 4-year college. I was taking out loans, and at one point was homeless and living in the library. And so it wasn't. I wouldn't say it could have been easy for me to have just kind of dropped out and went the other way, but you start where you can. And I don't even, and another thing is, I don't think you need to go to college to study this stuff. I think you can study it by doing this kind of stuff, by talking to people online and get an education, because a lot of seminars are talking with knowledgeable people about stuff, and there are knowledgeable people around. So the question is, what benefit does like going to the professional level give you? And I think what it gives you is like they're obligated to give you feedback, and you see these people for a long time, and they challenge your views and stuff like that to help you model what it means to think through these issues, because there's a tendency to take the path of least resistance. But yes, that's good that you want to study philosophy at the research level. Let's see. So Scrams. I thought his arguments for infants was a lot less convincing than the old Sperling arguments. Are you convinced by those Sperling arguments? Interesting. Um, I find the phenomenology of those Sperling arguments pretty convincing. And I've never been in like one of those experiments, but I've seen a lot of these demos. And I kind of do have the feeling that with a lot of practice, you get the sense that the letters are there, and the cue comes, and you kind of quickly try to move your attention to those letters, which are already there. Block seems to really feel strongly that everybody has that same response. But I guess that in my own, like when I do this because when I teach these things, I usually show this little demo of the Sperling class thing I have in the class. And I know it's just like a small sample, but I'll generalize to a larger sample in a second. But I do find that often students in this class come up with all sorts of different answers to the question, do you think that the letters were there? And you were moving your attention to them when the cue came. Some people feel like yes, some people feel like no, some people have no idea. And yeah, true, we only do it 10 or 15 or 20 times or something like that. And even that's kind of annoying in the classroom. And in the real experiment, these are done hundreds of times in blocks, so it's like you're doing it for hours. And so you may get a sense of like, as a subject of one of these like really extensive psychophysical things, that yeah, the things are there, and then you just quickly move your attention to it. So I kind of feel like intuitively that makes sense to me. And then when I hear all these other people say, no, that's not what they felt like, I go, huh, that's weird. And then there was this paper that came out by Francois Camerer and colleagues. I don't think he was the main author, but he was in there. And they did some experimental philosophy on this and actually just found that it's like not the case that most people feel like they saw all of the letters. So if your whole case is resting on that it really is like just a common sense claim that we see all of the letters. And I also think, by the way, now I'm going on and on, but I do think that you have to bracket and separate two things. So on the one hand, people you say I see all the letters. Okay, there's 12 letters in 3 rows. Okay, cool. So I see all the letters. That I see all the letters is compatible with me not seeing every single detail of every single letter, but it really could have been the case that I see, but it still could have been true that I see all the letters. That was the point that I was trying to make in this paper I wrote a long time ago, back in 2012, called The Myth of Phenomenological Overflow. That was basically the point I was trying to make, was that even if you really take this idea seriously, that people see all the letters, you could see all the letters in a kind of vague way, where it's true that you see them all, but you don't see the details of them all. And I tried to give an example of looking through like a dirty window and seeing a package outside, and maybe there's like letters written on the package, and you can see all the letters, but it's kind of foggy and misty, and there's dew on the glass or whatever, so you can't like read it, but you can tell they're all letters or something like that. But I would say it's true, I see all of them. Okay, so that's very different than the case where you see all the letters and also the detail of most of, not all of the letters. So um, uh, those are two ways of making it true that you see all of the letters. And I never really felt like Block clearly distinguished those two ways. It seemed to me that he kind of just says, people say they see all the letters, so they must have seen the details. And on the higher order approach, at least, you can make sense of the claim that there's a state which represents the details of all the letters and all the detail, but which you're aware of and aware of in a kind of generic or vague way, so that even though the details are there and that state is conscious, because it's the one that higher order is pointed at, it still is not the case that you experience all the details. So that's a subtlety. And in the course of arguing with Block over this for a long time, it kind of became clear to me that his main target in all of these overflow stuff is global workspace theory. And the higher order theory, I was taking it personal because he kept saying, oh, what about, no cognitive, it's overflowing everything cognitive. And we're like, okay, well, here's something cognitive. So that's why actually I'm part of this grant that we have with the Templeton people, which you can say whatever you want about them. But one thing I will say is they gave $3 million to philosophers to test theories of consciousness. So that's cool, I guess. But we're working together because I do think that there's like a way to try to get at this. In a sense, we both agree. So anyway, and let's see. Well, I forget what I was even saying. Oh yeah, I remember now. So I was just basically saying that I think that the overflow stuff is interesting, but you have to be careful about it a little bit. Okay. So, and that's why I think the Sperling stuff is less convincing than not the Landman, Schlichter, and Lama stuff, where they try to use this kind of mix of the Sperling and change Boyle's paradigm. So I think that's interesting. Okay, so I got to remember this question that Stephen asked, and we talked about Sperling a little bit. So let's see. Victor says, it seems to me that Block defends an internalist position similar to Papineau. I know, but Papineau thinks that they disagree. So quality are non-representational intrinsic properties of the brain. Um, so I think that too, but I don't know if David Papineau thinks that. That's interesting. And in fact, when I had Papineau on the podcast and we talked about this, I forget if I asked him what the similarity with the mental pain stuff was and the things of that nature. Um, but yeah, the I see that the next comment is the intrinsic bit is what's confusing. Um, so what they actually mean by it is a good question, but I think that like the block, I mean, so it's not non-relational, for example, for Block at least, because he says, well, these are states of the brain. So whatever red is, it's a highly relational thing because neural states are highly relational. Um, so by intrinsic, what he means, yeah, it's probably more internal in the sense that if you know of Adam Pautz's stuff, like internal in that sense, um, that it is what it is independently of like it's what it represents. So, yeah, I think that stuff is interesting, but I agree it's a bit confusing. But it basically, I think they're just trying to get the idea that you could have redness, like red, all by itself, without it representing anything, which is what representationalists deny. Let's see, what makes Sperling case seem convincing to me is that it seems like in order to form a representation of a row of letters as being after being cued, there had to have been a prior representation which encoded all of the letters. Yeah. Um, yeah, exactly. But I was trying to address that by suggesting that the prior representation, which encoded all of the letters, could have been conscious in a way that was degraded or partial, and you would have still had the same performance and the same sense that you saw them all, etc. And it would have been true that you saw them all. It just said would have been false that you saw every detail of them. Ooh, the sun's coming out, which is going to blind me. I might have to go over there. Stephen retracted a message. Bummer. Someone's asking me about my own view. Uh-oh. How do I think higher order? What's the T? Higher order thought or higher order theory? People use the T for different things. Fits together with identity theory of or mental paint views. Are these just divided credences, or do you think hot can be an identity theory? Um, yeah, so I think that you could have it both ways. As the what I call the traditional higher order theory, so that I can call them thoughts. As these thoughts like to these traditional higher order theorists. It's mean, but I will call them thoughts. Okay, so as these thoughts like to divide things up, they are functionalists. So the traditional higher order theory is a functionalist theory in the full blooded, 100% functionalist sense. It might even be more rabidly functional than like traditional functionalism in the sense that it could simply be like a Dennett type theory where there is no correspondence between the internal states of the thing you're trying to understand and the posits that you're making. So whereas you're on the one hand positing that there are internal states like sensations and perceptions, and in these may have a representational character, blah blah blah. And on the other hand, there are these things inside that are like firings of action potentials and calcium moving through neuron ion channels and so forth. And one view could simply be that that the folk psychological description of that stuff is a stance or a way of interpreting it, but not to be taken literally, as it'd be misleading to look inside the brain and try to find where these things are. So I don't know if anyone's explicitly endorsed that view, But I think that if you really push people like David Rosenthal, and you really don't let them hedge and hem and haw and squirm, and you really try to ask them seriously what their views are on this stuff, that it comes out like that. That on the one hand, you have the positive folk psychology, which we use to make sense of commonsensically what people are doing. And those things positive, and even you can sort of smell whiffs of this in Rosenthal's response to in his paper in the Festschrift for Dennett, actually, and Dennett has a response to him. And then I think that Rosenthal has a pretty good response to that. But I think they pretty much agree that it's a mistake to look for these things in the brain. So on the other hand, in less like radical moods and more like friendly to traditional cogsci, you could just take the higher order theory as a straight functional view. And then it starts to sort of look like you could have different versions of that. Like it could be analytic functionalism, where you take these folk psychological, and I think that's sort of how Rosenthal thinks of it, basically. You have all these folk psychological platitudes, and then you basically tells you what consciousness is, and then you deduce what the empirically, I'm sorry. You sort of have all these folk psychological platitudes that tell you what the thing is you're looking for. Then you empirically do some science to find that thing. And then you deduce that, pain is this brain state, a la David Lewis. And I think that that's I think that's the way most people think of the higher order thought theory, as that version of functionalism, that kind of like analytic functionalism. It's not the view that I hold. In fact, in this book that I allegedly wrote, I try to come out against that. But anyway, so I think that both of those are kinds of functionalism in a way, right? So the Dennett, sort of higher order Dennett, and then the traditional functional higher order. I think you could have those. I think it's also, though, open. It's also open that the things we're talking about are actually biological states, and that they might essentially be so. So I think that that's, if the sensation of red could be a biological thing, then so could the inner awareness of the sensation of red. So I tried to actually argue for this once a long time ago. What was the name of this ridiculous paper that I wrote? Oh yeah, Thinking Outside the Box. Get it? The box is functionalism because it's all boxes and arrows. And Fodor's idea that believing something was simply having it in your belief box. So I'm convinced of cognitive phenomenology, and I'm someone who thinks that that it's possible that the phenomenal aspect is attached to the attitudes, so that what it means to believe something is to feel a certain way towards a proposition. And what it means to desire something is to feel a different way about a proposition. And what it means to wonder something is to feel a third way. Or I guess you could debate about whether it's broken down into any of those, whether you really could reduce all of these things. This is what I try to argue for in my The Mark of the Mental paper, which I think as a graduate student, I wasn't really clear on a lot of these issues, and it could have been clearer. But anyway, that was my view, and still is my view, that it's possible that what it means to have a kind of cognitive state is to have this mental quality attached to a proposition, something playing a functional role. And the quality that I postulated was the quality of conviction, as I called it, as a joke, get it? But quality of conviction. As in when someone says, you don't have the quality of your conviction, sir. So that's a joke. But I do think that this is what it means to believe something, is to feel convinced. And it feels a certain way to think that the thing is true, to really believe it, to take it as true. And you can kind of, I try to suggest, see it missing in certain delusional states where people believe things, but they don't really seem to act on those beliefs, and they describe these things in a that's feeling different than their ordinary thoughts. It's one interpretation. I'm not saying I'm right. I'm just saying this is my kind of background view. So maybe that would, I could ask Block about that, because I kind of, is this a qualia associated with thinking? I'd say, yeah, the quality is the attitude, though, not the content. It's not, and this was my response to the traditional argument against cognitive phenomenology, which was, if there is such a thing, then how come when I think 2 + 2 is 5, and when I think Washington, D.C. is the scene of a horrific thing that happened today, then they feel the same way? And my answer is, well, because I believe both. And believing it that's what feels the same. The propositional content towards which I hold that belief, that's not where the quality comes from. Although I also like David Pitt's view that there are associated with that. And I am very much on board with that, and have suggested in this paper I wrote with Pete Mandic, what is it like to think that you think that P? That it falls out of the higher order approach just because of what the account of phenomenal consciousness on offer is. So my view is that the higher order theory is compatible with each of these camps. One is more aligned with a kind of biological view. It could be that this mental quality, if it exists associated with cognitive states or inner awareness, is a biological thing, a la Block. Like I think my kind of, the thing I have the most credence in is something like that. So I see these all laid out, and me kind of splitting my views. I used to have a lot more in the biological. Like when I started this, I was in grad school, I was like all on Block side, and I've gradually widened my view and come to have an open mind about this stuff. But so I do think that the higher order theory can be an identity theory in that way. So there's two ways. One is the Lewis way, where it's the, token identity theory. And the other is the kind of Block way, which I think of as more of the type identity theory. So you could kind of have both versions of these. My own tendency is to kind of abandon folk psychology and to say, look, I don't really care about things like thoughts and beliefs and sensations. I'm interested in the folk psychological concept of inner awareness, but then I'm interested in the cognitive neurosciences and what those guys are talking about. And they often don't talk about thoughts and things of that nature. I talk about representations and informational processing states. So I'm more interested in those kinds of things. So I guess I would see the kind of higher order theory that I'm most interested in, as opposed to like the style from Rosenthal, which I view as analytic functionalism, basically, or a Dennett style stance view. I see myself as aligned more with the biological view, or the psychofunctionalism, which says that we don't want to look for the states of folk psychology, but we want to look for the states which are postulated in our best theories, which come from cognitive neuroscience. So that's what I'm interested in. Are those states the kind of states that Steve Fleming and Hakuan Lau postulate? And they're not from folk psychology, these kind of computational level states, or these kind of this inner architecture of pointing and etc. These things are postulated because of theorizing in cognitive neuroscience, computer science, psychology, etc., not because of folk psychology beliefs, introspection stuff. So I see that the kind of traditional spectra of views as translated into the higher order camp as being pretty much the same. That you could be an analytic functionalist, you could be a psychofunctionalist, you could be a type identity theorist, etc. It's been underexplored, because people dismiss these kind of things out of hand. But I guess now we're getting to the point where maybe people are not quite out of hand. But so yeah, divided credences. I do think the hot could be an identity theory, but I also have a credence in the non-higher order identity theory, which used to be my primary view, I would say. I definitely am one of these people who, when I first heard about the higher order thought theory, my first response was, This fucking shit's obviously false. Like, what are you talking about? And I remember my professor at the time said, "Oh, I'll tell him you said that." And I was like, "Oh, fuck, this guy's a real guy. He's not like dead like Aristotle." And that was my first realization that philosophers were still around and something called philosophy was still going on. Anyway, no one cares about that. Okay. Um, is my book coming out this year? Oh, I don't know. Yeah, the book. I submitted the book. I have a contract for the book. They keep telling me that that means they could still reject it. So I don't know what that means, but they gave me a contract. I signed something. And I submitted the rough draft or the completed draft or whatever. And they said it's going to be reviewed again. So it's under review again. And then I don't know if the reviewer, how this works. I've never done this before, but so I can't say if the reviewer could reject it and they could tell me to piss off, and I would be like, yeah, that makes sense. So I don't know about the book, but allegedly I'm supposed to hear back about it in April, I think, or somewhere in that time. So I'll keep you guys posted. Anyone who wants to see the draft that I have currently, and I'm hoping, by the way, to get feedback from reviewers, I would love to revise it. Anyway, so anyone's welcome to check it out. It's in a sort of good enough for government work, as I joke, and I am a government employee because I work for CUNY, technically funded by the government. So yeah. Okay. Stephen, do you think there are two mere verbal disputes going on in discussions about illusionism? Uh-oh. One about phenomenal consciousness and one about illusionism. Huh. I wonder if I can get you to say a little bit more about that. The verbal dispute stuff about illusionism, I don't know. I want it to be a verbal dispute. I tend to think of illusionism as like, you know, type A physicalism, where the A stands for, it's like physicalism for assholes. That's mean. I don't mean it that way, but I mean physicalism for people who want to like be rhetorically aggressive and shake things up. Because I do wonder if it's anything different than just functionalism. Like that's my main critique of it, is that it seems like, and I guess this is where your question is coming from about the verbal dispute, is I feel like it's just a re-description of the old view in an inflammatory way, which gets people like Galen Strawson to say the ridiculous things that Galen Strawson says, which, if you saw my reaction, caused me to choke on my coffee because it was so fucking ridiculous. Like, it was completely like bonkers, in my mind, bonkers ridiculous to have that reaction. Well, I'll qualify that. It's bonkers ridiculous to have that reaction after having met Keith and all these guys and talked with them and sort of realizing that this is not what they're saying. So I felt like, yeah, one question I had was, is it anything more than just your typical type A physicalism, where A is not for assholes again, but it's just analytic functionalism, where you're just saying, look, we sort of already know what consciousness is. It's the thing that does this stuff, that causes us to say, what is this, and so forth and so on. It's just now they have had this fancy word for it. So I did sort of feel like that was merely a verbal dispute. What's the other verbal dispute, though, about? I mean, but I don't know if it's a verbal dispute, by the way, to be honest with you. I feel like it is, and that it's just this kind of inflammatory rhetoric on the part of the illusionists, and they're just regular functionalists. On the other hand, regular functionalists don't want to get rid of talking about what it's like in phenomenal consciousness. So if the illusionists really got their way and like for real won this battle or whatever, and then everyone just stopped talking this way when we talk about consciousness, and instead we just talked about these illusionary properties that make us think these things, Huh? Yeah, I don't know. I really can't. I can't take that seriously. I don't know. Maybe it's a deficit in me, but when I hear someone like Keith Frankish talk about illusionism, what I think is here's a guy who like thinks the transparency of consciousness takes that seriously. So when they try to introspect the redness of the rose, they get the rose only. They get the strong sense that the things are out there. You want to explain like the things out there and then our reaction to it. And then there's no leftover like mystery puzzle about what is likeness or something because we're just talking about stuff out there and our reactions to it. So that seems like just like, okay, you want to give an account of what it's like to be us in a way that's compatible with this, like, things are ordinary. And I agree with that. So, okay. But on the other hand, then has that really gotten rid of any what it's like stuff? I don't see it getting rid of anything. I see it just like not wanting to talk about it. So, um, yeah. So I get the idea. I see you writing something down there, Stephen. I think you're right about that. That people use so whether there is any neutral conception of consciousness is something that I've argued with Keith about for a long time. My very first like YouTube experience was talking to Keith about this or Philosophy TV or whatever. So he wants to say that any like notion of phenomenal consciousness that is interesting is going to be theoretically loaded in this way, that it rules it out with that puts it in conflict with physicalism. I don't see that, so I don't agree. So I don't think that's a verbal dispute. I think that's a real dispute. So the verbal dispute, what was the thing I was talking about, which is whether or not they are really just regular functionalists who are trying to explain phenomenal consciousness. But I see your point about refers to experiences with special properties. Yeah, but I disagree with that. I think that phenomenal consciousness refers to what it's like, and what it's like seemingly doesn't suggest itself as a functional sort of thing. That doesn't mean that it isn't, but doesn't seem like it is, as evidenced by the non-contradictoriness of these merry things and zombie things and, generally speaking, invert cases, etc. So those aren't special properties. Those are just that it doesn't seem like a functional property. As far as I know, no one disagrees with that. Not even Dennett. Does he? Maybe Paul Churchland. I mean, I heard Paul Churchland once say that you could introspect your own brain states, and Pete Mendick tried to argue for that too. I didn't find it convincing. But if you really take that idea that things are so theory laden that becoming immersed in a certain theory changes your perception, then maybe if you learned enough neuroscience, you would sort of start to feel like, oh, gee, the serotonin levels in my hippocampus are low. I can't remember where we ate for lunch yesterday. So anyway, but I do wonder, Stephen, what you thought the verbal dispute about illusion was. So yeah, I don't think it's a verbal dispute that consciousness has these properties, or I think it's a verbal dispute that phenomenal consciousness seems non-physical. I don't agree. What it seems like is not functional. So okay, just become a panpsychist. Why making complicate? I can't just become anything because uh, I really do think that believing something feels a certain way. I don't feel convinced of any of these views. Panpsychism, I feel like, is the most facilely endorsed in the sense that people think it solves something when I don't think it does. I think it's interesting. And if you're convinced by the a priori arguments against physicalism, it's certainly a view you should take seriously. Um, so, to the degree that I find that stuff somewhat convincing, I am somewhat convinced by reasons to think of panpsychism as a serious view. But I don't think it solves anything or answers any of the questions that we have been talking about. Um, Certainly, I don't see how panpsychism gives you any leg up on understanding how any of these things relate to the brain and whether it's higher order or lower order, first order, in the sensory cortex, in the frontal cortex, what kind of activity in the frontal cortex. I mean, I would be really impressed if you could derive from panpsychism some kind of brain state that I should be in when I see red, but you can't. So it's therefore less interesting and doesn't really, I mean, in the sense that it's trying to say we can solve this problem that you guys can't. I don't think it makes it less uncomplicated in that sense. So becoming a panpsychist doesn't make you have a less complicated view. You still have just as complicated a view. And there's many different kinds of panpsychists, by the way. Let's see. Jor says, Brown. I guess that's me. Do you have any views on bridge principles and how logic is tied to reasoning? Bridge principles. I don't know if I know what you mean by a bridge principle. But yes, I do have views about how logic is tied to reasoning, but I think the issues are complicated. So I kind of have over time become more Kripkean about my views, in a sense. What maybe I have a different interpretation of what that means than someone else, but I guess a person I'm influenced to is a philosopher named Gillian Russell. She recently just wrote a book called Barriers to Entailment or something like that, which I recommend. And she's influenced me on this stuff. But I think that there definitely is reasoning. So we reason. And there are times when we reason well and then when we don't reason well. And I feel like we intuitively know what those cases are in some sense, generally speaking. Logic, as I understand it, with a lowercase l, which is to say a formal language, is distinct from that. I don't think that any formal language accurately captures human reasoning, or at least I'm not 100% convinced that it does. I mean, maybe it could, but I'm not convinced. So my view is that language is a theory. Logic is a theory which tries to take a simple case, maybe a selected subportion of a language or some inferences, and to give a formal model of that. And so in the fullest case, we have, first order logic with quantifiers and identity, and then we have modal logic as extensions of that and so forth. These are all formal languages. And I actually just watched this interesting video, which was called, Why Did Quine Hate Ruth Barkin Marcus? It turns out some of it just sexism, some other stuff. But yeah, it is. And I heard all kinds of stories about Ruth having gone to school in New York, and all this stuff. So those are formal languages. And we define the rules for those formal languages. We who make them up. So I don't think that first order logic with identity is like the language of reasoning, I think is a model of what it means to reason and truth functionally with quantifiers and so forth. So whether that model accurately captures what we do when we reason is something that's open for debate. So I'm not sure if I'm even answering your question, Jor. Jor is the one who answered this. It's totally permissible to refer to me as Brown, by the way. I don't care. I just thought it was funny. No, I don't care about Professor. No. Fuck no. Okay, good. You love Gillian Russell. I kind of skipped ahead just to see what Jor was going to say back to me. But yes, pluralism is good. Yes, I agree. Okay, so is that what the kind of thing you were asking about? So my own view is that reasoning comes first. That's the kind of Kripkean view, is that we reason. And then these other formal languages that we come up with, we have to use our own reasoning abilities to adjudicate between them. And part of me is convinced also by this other argument that comes kind of from the Timothy Williamson side of the fence, that whenever we're sort of evaluating these arguments, we ascend to a meta level where the kind of classical rules of logic seem to kind of come back into effect. So law of excluded middle and stuff like that seems to be a part of the reasoning process when we're evaluating at this meta level, even if we're evaluating a system in which at the first order level, the law of non-contradiction may be violated. It seems like at the higher level, when we're evaluating whether we should accept this or what we should do, it does seem like I am very tempted by the view that the traditional principles of classical logic kind of come back in some sense. And that you kind of can't adopt any old logic that you want, a la Kripke, and that there's something kind of primitively formal, like basic, that either is somehow like primitively formally basic, or it's just like conventional, comes from the community that we're in. So I go back and forth about that kind of stuff. But yeah, logical theories are substantive on my view, not topic neutral. Yes, I would say that. Yes. Interesting. Yeah. Huh. It's a good question. Yeah. Interesting. I have to think about that more. Um, okay. So let's see here. Feel free to jump back in. I know I'm jumping around here. And by the way, hopefully I didn't put you too much off by being amused by you calling me Brown. Okay, so I wonder if this is an identity theory so much as in a consciousness first sort of view. On my view, you mean? Because if it seems like we analyze functional cognitive states in terms of conscious properties, so this seems like it could just as well be compatible with property dualism or something like that. Huh. Interesting. I forget when you asked this question. Was this back when we were talking about functionalism? Consciousness first. So consciousness first is a slogan that I identify with the Pautz movement in philosophy, the Adam Pautz movement. If that's not what you meant, then that is fine. It's not like it's bad, but that's what I took from when you use that. When you use that sort of view. And Pautz is a representationalist. I tried to get Adam on here too, and then he had some unfortunate stuff happen, and then I haven't ever been able to get it back in touch with him. But I would like to talk to him. He's an interesting guy with lots of cool arguments. So definitely someone is worth spending time thinking about his views. But consciousness first. So about it's about me. Yes. Yeah, consciousness first. Well, I don't think it's right to take myself as a consciousness first person. I'm a consciousness alongside. So I do think there's two sources of evidence that we have, and one of them is first personal, that consciousness counts as a source of evidence. I do think that, but I don't think that it's our only source of evidence. I think that we have third personal sources as well, and we want them to get along with each other. Uh, but we analyze functional cognitive states in terms of conscious properties. I kind of see what you're talking about, because I do think that like what it means to be a belief is should be ultimately analyzed in terms of like how things feel to you, what it seems like from the first person point of view. Uh, when you bring the proposition up or whatever, whether it's a kind of mental assent or endorsement or a questioning or a kind of standing back from or a moral squeamishness or whatever. So, and I also agree that these kind of states are individuated by what it's like to be in them. So that when you want to say pick out the state, you're delineating which state you're talking about in terms of what it's like for you, at least from the first person, from the inside, so to speak. So, yeah, is this an identity theory? Well, what is an identity theory? So, identity theory says, as I understand it, that there are these two sets of correlated properties, and then we want to know how to treat them. And the two sets of correlated properties are these two. So on the one hand, there are the things which we learn from third personal stuff, and on the other hand, the stuff like I was just mentioning, which you get from the inside, so to speak. And the identity theory claims they're the same. So is that a consciousness first view? It's a don't get rid of consciousness view. I think that's, yeah, but I don't know if it's consciousness first. So maybe you say more about that. And oops, I can come back to that. Compatible with property dualism or something like this. I mean, I guess I do want it to be the case that you could be a property dualist. Maybe I'm misunderstanding what you're saying, because I think that, well, so there's another debate in the area we could get distracted by, but there's a topic neutral debate. So is this stuff topic neutral? Okay, so I don't want to get distracted by that debate, but just I think it should be compatible with property dualism. So we have the consciousness stuff, and it says being in pain, that's a shooting, stabbing pain, is more like a burning, searing pain than it is like a itch, or we can do these sort of things from the first person. And then we have another set of properties that we learn from the neuroscience, and they line up in a certain way where there's correlations that exist between them. And then the question is, what do you do with those correlations? So that's the way the identity theory was traditionally set up from Jack Smart and those guys, was that this kind of like, here's the correlations, we learn them from science. Now, how do we react to them? And you could react to them by saying, well, these things are separate properties, distinct from each other. You could react to them by saying they're identical, or you could react to them by saying the correlation is illusionary. I don't know. So, yeah, I think of that as the traditional root for the identity theory, and not as a consciousness first kind of view, because as I take that, like for instance, the Pouts view against the identity theory, we had some exchanges at the Consciousness Online event that I organized a long time ago. And I wanted to follow up on those in our discussion, if he ever comes on. We followed up in other ways. But anyway, so something I'd like to talk to him about is this idea that there's an intentionality to our consciousness. So when you experience something red, the redness seems to be out there, and it's like we're directed towards it. That's world orientedness or directionness or whatever. Different places call different things. So I think he's right about that. So he claims that in part that's, I mean, there's a lot of complicated stuff going on here, but in part of the argument is that that's incompatible with it being identical to a neural state, because neural states don't have that kind of directedness built into them. It's kind of contingent feature. So I think that kind of stuff is interesting and should be taken seriously. But that seems to me to be exactly the difference between like the consciousness first view and the identity theory. The consciousness first view says these properties which consciousness seems to have, you take them seriously, and if it rules out that they're identical to physical states, so much the worse for those things. Whereas I would want to say these are epistemological things or representational things or something, but that we don't want to, that it can't rule out the identity between it and a physical state. So I would see this as kind of the standard. Maybe I'm just repeating myself. So I'll see what you say about that as we go down. Let's see. Alexander, what influenced you most to move away from the biological view and become more open to a broader range of possibilities? Yeah. Good question. I recently described this as kind of like my last prejudice, my last known prejudice, which is being biased towards biology in a way that I think maybe isn't justified, therefore is why it's a prejudice. So I guess like my own personal just self wise, I just naturally find the biological view common sense. And I kind of feel like a lot of people that are not versed in all these debates sort of are on that fence as well. That it's either something about life, which seems important, or something about biology that seems important. So in the old days, what used to really convince me was like the kind of Chinese room argument from Searle and these kind of things. And those have kind of lost their grip. I get the intuition, but I'm more skeptical about intuitions. So less inclined to take it seriously. But I think that kind of what influenced me the most towards opening up are two things, really. So the first thing is just that the success of a functional explanation is impressive. And the second is that the details of biology turn out to be largely seemingly functional. So when you actually study neuroscience and you go down to the neuronal level and you look at what is there in the hopes of finding something to pin your hat on and say, maybe this is this special and interesting thing down there, you don't find it. So, there are the ions. There's the calcium and the sodium and the potassium, some proteins, and the proteins are doing something, performing a function. And those ions also seem to be performing functions in terms of the voltage and opening ion channels. And all of that stuff seems to be exquisitely functionally organized. And the idea of the cell as a little machine, a factory, is hard to resist when you look at the details. So it seems like, what else is there really when you're down at that level? It looks like a bunch of functions. And it's hard to say what in that functionality is going to be doing the work. So I like that, my old self was it's patterns, and I still have this view. So I don't think it's refuted. You just asked me what opened my mind. So it's thinking along these lines over many years that kind of forced me to take this stuff more seriously. But it's like, so you think it's electrical activity in the brain. Great. But what is that electrical activity? It's just these ions. So it's just sodium going in the cell. It's calcium. It's potassium coming out of the cell. It's calcium going in and having the secondary effect. And the electrical signal going down the axon is just ions going in and out of the cell. So either there's something special about those ions or the neurotransmitters, or it's just functions. But those ions and neurotransmitters look for all the world to be doing their job in terms of the function they have. The neurotransmitters fit into receptors because of the shape they have. The ions open ion channels because of the charge they carry. So it just doesn't, even this idea that there's a two-stage process. So on the one hand, there's electrical signals and then there's neurotransmitters. But as I just said, those turn out to be just either voltage and shape, or so it seems. And we could always find out tomorrow that there's some new force in the brain that we don't know about. And so those doors, in my opinion, should be kept open. However, it does start to feel like one is kind of just holding on to a view in spite of not knowing why you should think it's true. Because when one looks at the way the brain does what we thought was so interesting and special, it looks like it bottoms out into performing these functions, these lower level functions. So I don't think that rules out the view, but it does lead me to think that resisting the functional kind of account in my resistance of it, because I used to be like a death first, the sort of the way I am about illusionism, actually about functionalism. Maybe because I sort of saw functionalism as like basically a kind of illusionism where you give up or something like that. But yeah, it looks like you're just trying to find in something special, but there isn't anything. It's just normal stuff doing the things which science talks about, which is playing some role, having some function. Even at the fundamental level, when you finally find out what electrons and stuff are, the physicists say, they're just things doing these other things. It's just playing this role, having a function. So it does sort of seem hard to find the intrinsic bits that are not functional in any sense and would have, therefore, the ability to play this role. Now, that doesn't, like I said, refute it, because we could find out tomorrow this new thing that we didn't know about, or maybe it is the calcium. The calcium, man, the calcium. Just drink your milk. Vegan milk. Anyway, who knows? So that's kind of what pushed me away. It wasn't any thought experiment or like dancing qualia or those sorts of things. It was the empirical details, and then sort of really trying to think about, well, why is it so important to me personally that it be something that's not functional, which is doing this? And the answer is I couldn't really think of something which was convincing to me, besides this sort of intuition that I have in the Chinese room cases and these other kind of thought experiments, which I don't find as convincing. The other empirical reason is I think that, that there is something interesting about the fact that it goes this two-stage route. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. All right, so I caught up to where Stephen was saying this, and then let's see. I take it that the rejection of P consciousness follows from the distinguishing of P conscious from a consciousness, from a consciousness. Oh. From the dissociation of phenomenal consciousness from its info processing role. Well, that would be a weird thing to take, because you could take the block route, which I think is the more traditional type B. I'm here to represent the type B camp. So I joke about this, but I don't understand what revolution happened where people reject type B physicalism. So you can distinguish P consciousness from A consciousness. Bloch has invented that distinction. But he doesn't reject P consciousness, even though he rejects that it has solely an info processing role. So I just don't see why he would have to do that. All right, so now here's this is what I asked a long time ago. So some people seem to think illusionism refers to the view that no one ever has conscious experience. Yet both Frankish and Dennett clearly think there are conscious experience. Yeah, that's the other verbal dispute. I would have said that's the same dispute as the other one, but yeah, I see what you mean now from back then. Chalmers seemed to suggest in that clip he posted the other day. Strawson suggested that in the video he reacted to. Others seem to suggest something similar. I think you're right that and especially in the clip that was posted the other day, Chalmers kind of vacillates. He's like, yes, we want these strong illusionists to say this easily refutable thing, but they often don't, because that their view isn't really that no one has ever had conscious experience, because that's really hard to say with a straight face. I mean, it's like saying no one's ever suffered. In the philosophy of religion debate, from the problem of evil, equally ridiculous, in my view. So I see what you mean, though, Stephen, that the illusionism refers to the view that no one ever has had conscious experience. That's the view that I call strong illusionism, that there's nothing that it's like to be us. Weak illusionism is, in my view, is that we need to refine the concept of what it's like to be us. So I sort of do see what you mean. Yes, I understand now more clearly that these two verbal disputes. One is like over what counts as an illusion. The other is what counts as phenomenal consciousness. I see them as going together, but I see maybe it's helpful to distinguish them. I still think that the illusionists are just your type A physicalists who think that phenomenal consciousness. Well, no, here's what I think. I think that the illusionists are the people who think that it doesn't really matter where in the physical functioning of the system you say that there is phenomenal consciousness. And in a way, you can kind of almost get into the mood here, where it's like everyone's going to agree on all the like details of how the brain works and what states we assign. Here's the perception. Here's your inner aware of the perception. Here's your stream that goes to reporting. And then people are going to argue. So is phenomenal consciousness here? Is it there or over there? And the illusionist says it doesn't really matter, right? That's the verbal dispute, according to them. Whereas I think it does matter at that point. There is a fact of the matter about where the phenomenal consciousness belongs. So I don't think this is a merely verbal dispute in that sense. I think there really is something that it's like to be us. And if someone says there isn't, then they either must be playing a word game or saying something weird. This is where my like Shambi argument and stuff comes in. I think you can argue against illusionism in this way. So it's perfectly conceivable that the kind of conscious thing that Chalmers is talking about is physical. That's what a Shambi is. So I'm not prepared to give that up until someone tells me why I should. So would it then be inconceivable for the illusionist to have a scenario where a subject S does not have the introspection system, but nevertheless has a phenomenal experience? Yeah, exactly. So that's good question. Oops, hold on. What just happened? Inconceivable for the illusionist to have a scenario or a subject. I think on their view, they're going to say they have a quasi-phenomenal property or whatever thing it is down there. But yeah, they're going to have those states. But I agree with the kind of what I interpret as the force of your question, Victor, that there's still a question about whether it is, whether there is something that is like for that subject. Seems to me to matter morally and for all sorts of reasons. So I don't really like the strategy of saying what it's like talk is confused or we don't know what it is. And, I try to take this stuff seriously, but it's hard for me. Maybe that's my last known prejudice against illusionism and qualia quietists. You qualia quietists. Okay, is rationality normative? Yes, of course it is. I would say so. I don't know. Why did you ask that? No, because we were talking about logic earlier. I know, but yes, I would say so. Okay, so we talked about Gillian Russell. So, okay, bridge principle is basically a relation between logical facts and norms of docility. Okay. I get what you're going for now. Okay. A relation between logical facts and norms for doxastic attitudes. Yeah. Like that you ought not to believe contradictions and you ought to reason according to modus ponens and things of that nature. I mean, yeah, so my view is that So is modus ponens a valid argument for him? Well, it depends on what you're talking about. So if you're talking about reasoning versus like a formal language, um, so I guess a bridge principle would be something that connects like the abstract idea of modus ponens or whatever to the principle that says you ought to reason according to it or something like that. Um, type B for the win. I don't want anyone to win, by the way. Well, I mean, win, but I would like it not to be out of the running. And I do feel like the illusionists get all the headlines. It's like illusionism versus panpsychism. It's like, where's all the, what happened to the reasonable people? That's a joke. I think panpsychism is reasonable, and so is, well, maybe versions of illusionism. But am I like a Platonist about? I'm open to Platonism. I like Platonism. It's a strange view. I even like someone mentioned I should talk to Eric Steinhardt, and then I also saw a video of Eric talk. I know Eric kind of, not really, but I sort of he's the boss of Pete Mendick, or was for a while. I guess Pete's the boss of him now. I don't know. Anyway, so he's a weird guy, but interesting, and he likes Platonism. Lots of people do. So it's not like am I a Platonist about logic though. My tendencies lean towards like nominalism. Even though I like Platonism, I don't think of myself as a Platonist and about the I don't think of there being like abstract facts about logic. Um, or math for that matter, for those who care. Um, and I've kind of always been on the Hartree Field side of things, and maybe of my more radical views like Quine or even Mill. Mill had some wild ideas about math, by the way, about them being empirical generalizations, which I think is cool, but very far out there. So I don't. I think that are there some abstract bridging principles between the abstract realm and us? I wouldn't even understand how that would be binding, like how that would affect me in such a way. Although maybe you could tell a story about it. So I would have to say I have to read more about it and so forth and so on, like John McFarlane's specific work. But um, um, I mean, this is why I take the Kripke stuff seriously because I find this stuff very paradoxical. And I kind of been convinced by the Romina Padro interpretation of the adoption problem from Kripke that even if you were a Platonist about laws of logic and stuff like that, it still wouldn't really help you answer the kinds of puzzles that come from Kripke because it still wouldn't tell you how this rule guides your action, how the character of the rule, and especially in this case that she considers there's Harry, who has never let's just bring out the whole thing here about the adoption problem. So you have Harry. Harry's a guy who's never reasoned according to the principle of universal generalization. I think Romina's example is from the movie Madagascar. You tell him all the animals in the movie talk, and then you ask Harry, does the lion talk or whatever? And he says, I don't know, I haven't seen the movie. And you're supposed to, universal instantiation tells you if the generalization is true, then all of its instances are true. So if the lion is an animal in the movie and all animals in the movie talk, then you should be able to infer from that the lion talks. But Harry is someone who's never done this before. That's the idea. Harry's never reasoned according to universal instantiation. You tell him what it is. You say, well, Harry, whenever there's a universal generalization, you should infer that each of its instances is true. And then you kind of get the problem again. Harry's not going to know when to follow this rule, basically, so that you kind of get this. The problem um, being that there's nothing you could tell or give to Harry which would allow him to reason according to universal instantiation. That's kind of a general way to put the puzzle. That comes from Romina, originally from Saul Kripke, but then Romina has, written this dissertation, What the Tortoise Said to Kripke, where she kind of draws all this stuff out. And I find that stuff not convincing, but challenging. I do wonder what the right answer here is. And even if you were a Platonist about logic, I don't really see how that would solve this problem. I mean, the obvious answer is that we learn how to reason from those around us in a certain way, and because of our natural kind of thing we are. So those seem to be the places you'd have to look to answer this challenge, not to the world of Platonism. And that's exactly, the kind of skeptical solution to the paradox is from the practice, from what people do. That's why we reason the way we do, and so forth. So I do think that this is kind of a serious challenge about what it means to give a correct account of human reasoning. The general basic idea behind Kripke's critique, of course, is that any general account we give, we're going to have to reason in order to assess it. So it can't capture everything we're doing. So I don't know about these bridge principles. I find this stuff very perplexing. But interesting. So there's a lot more that could be said about that, but sorry. Let's move on a little bit. So I'll come back to that if anyone's interested, though. I find that stuff interesting. So let's see. Yep, I'm getting it. Okay. Compatible with identity theory is that you say awareness is the way something can be phenomenally. But this seems a lot like what Chalmers is going to say about beliefs as being these conscious things. So zombies don't have phenomenal beliefs in this richer sense. And yes, then I take it that the Pout's argument against identity theory can come in here. But I guess if you reject that, then that sort of thing, then it makes good sense. Okay, that's fair enough. Biology would be fun. Okay, yeah, that's interesting. So, first of all, I agree that if there are zombies, they don't have the same beliefs that I do. Because, for example, when I believe things, I think it feels a certain way. And that's even beyond the special case of my beliefs about my phenomenal states. Like if I believe that I'm seeing red right now, which I'm looking around. Aha, there's some red. That's another thing that's got me all second guessing stuff about aphantasia and my realization that I have it has caused me to and some other stuff as well. But anyway, okay. So, and I think of Chalmers as a kind of higher order theorist in the broad sense. Not really, because I define higher order theorist in a specific way, in particular as being someone who thinks you could explain consciousness with the theoretical structure of inner awareness and so forth. And Chalmers doesn't think you can do that because he doesn't think you can explain it in any way. It has to be fundamental and posited at the base level. So in that sense, he's not a higher order theorist, but he has the basic intuition that there's a kind of inner awareness involved in all phenomenal consciousness. He just thinks that inner awareness is somehow a part or component of the representational state that you're aware of. So, and I do see myself as like trying to interpret the higher order theory in a way that makes sense of what I take to be the common sense phenomenology here, which is that of the Edenic world, to use the Chalmers term, where Eden is the world where things are just the way they appear, and there is no distinction between illusion and reality. And the world is generally as it seems to us. So that when I look at a red apple, in the possible world of Eden, the red apple is really red. And the redness is not a property of me, but a property of the apple. And and that it's a property that would have independently of any observer on this view. Like, so is that a possible world? I don't know. It seems conceivable. It seems like that's how people thought this world was until, for various arguments. And some people still think the world is that way. I think it's harder to do that, but I think direct realism, naive realism, still around. So I take that to be the correct phenomenology. Like, just starting from the way things seem naively, it seems like the world is out there. The properties of the world that it has are out there. So I want us to have a kind of inner awareness of things what we represent as being primitive qualities or something like that. So, okay, that is sort of what Chalmers is going to say. So I see Chalmers as like trying to articulate, well, excuse me, I see Chalmers' view as one that a lot of people want to emulate, but not be non-physicalists. So, in fact, people like Uriah Kriegel and people like Anna Guastina and Rocco Gennaro and I mean, I can name some other, not Josh necessarily, Weisberg, Joseph Gottlieb, another younger guy. All of these guys, in my view, have in common that they want to, Sam Coleman, Vincent Picciuto. I mean, there's a lot of these for philosophy. There's a lot. So obviously with a grain of salt. But all of these persons kind of take this model and then try to want to naturalize it. The idea that there's a representation, and then somehow that's an awareness of itself, and there's an awareness of the world and of itself at the same time. And my view is to argue that, well, anything you could do, representations could do better. So it certainly seems that way, I would say, but it simply might be because you're representing your life, your mental world as being that way. So that what's really going on is you have a representation, which might be a kind of cognitive state, which represents you as having this kind of primitive contact with a quality and also being self-aware of it, maybe even. I mean, you could go all sorts of ways. So I do think that my general strategy, and one that I think I share with Jake Berger. I saw that Jake just had a paper come out on Erkentis, on which basically makes a kind of similar argument, I would say. Jake and I have worked together, written papers together, so I think we share many background views. But in this paper, he tries to argue basically that naive realism, direct realism, whatever, you could have a version of that phenomenology from the higher order theorist point of view by having the higher order state represent you as being in this kind of relational thing. And I'm like, yes, exactly. That's one way things could go here. So that if you want to capture the way the phenomenology appears to you, then according to the higher order theorist, you postulate those kinds of representational contents in the higher order state. And that's good because now we can go and look and see, are there any states in the brain that correspond to this level of complexity or not? And that's the sort of thing that I'm doing with Ned and all these other guys. Ned, Dave, Rachel, BU. I'm forgetting some other people too that are going to be mad at me. A whole group of people though. And what we're trying to do is exactly this kind of idea here. Whereas if there are these kind of states and they do have this kind of rich complexity, then we should be able to find some evidence for them. Then maybe we won't, in which case I will lower my belief that there are those kind of states. So I do think it's a way to go forward here, and that all of these views are interesting. I spent a lot of time about this in my book, trying to say, okay, so the Chalmers view is like a model, and then how can we capture that? But anyway, I'm getting distracted because really, Cass Scrams Dra. Oh, is it supposed to be like Cassandra? Caskramstra? Okay, I'm slow. Okay. If that is what you're going for now, I don't know. But anyway, so I think at the point that you're making is that the kind of consciousness first aspect, it does seem like I'm in trying to, that I'm saying similar things to the Pouts Chalmers kind of view. And my kind of long-winded response has been to try to say, yes, thank you. Ooh, I'm getting off-camera support. Yummy. So my long-winded response has been to say, I agree. I'm trying to capture what those guys say, but not how they say or commit. Cool. By the way, I've heard the word screamo before. I don't know what that means. I sort of know, but I don't. Like, I can't name bands that I would classify as that genre. So I don't know. Anyway, okay. So I could kind of see though how you're thinking that I would be in that camp. But what I'm trying to say is that what I'm trying to do is capture what that camp is saying, but from a representational point of view. And those guys call themselves representationalists too, so that muddies the water. But in the kind of representational sense that could be seen as implemented in a physical system like the brain. So hopefully without that other stuff. But actually, I am sort of committed to the idea that all the things that I say about the higher order theory could be true of a non-physicalist higher order theory. So you could have representations, not that they are identical to these states in the brain, but that they're correlated with those states would still go through. So I guess I am more open, I think, to the ecumenical vibe. So yeah, but I'm also open to changing my mind on this because I'm not 100% sure. But so unsymbolized thoughts. I don't know who Hulbert is. Can people think without any mental imagery? Yeah, I don't know. The aphantasia stuff is interesting, and especially in my own case, it kind of shook um, my belief that I had seen it all, so to speak. Well, because I mean, not to go too into my own personal stuff, but I'm a narcissist, so I love to talk about myself. But when I was younger, I did go through a period where I took psychedelics, and I experimented heavily, actually, with LSD and psilocybin and other things too, mescaline, so forth. Okay, so, but at that time, I didn't know I had aphantasia. I thought I was normal. So I used to think, yeah, I know what qualia are and stuff because I had all these psychedelic experiences. When I studied philosophy, I was like, oh, this is what we're talking about. Now, obviously, in the normal case, you don't notice it because there's the table, there's the chair. But, when you take psychedelics, you notice, well, gee, these things behave strangely. And one comes to think about one's own experience and so forth and so on. Okay. So I had sort of felt secure in a sense that I had the right qualifications. But then I read this paper actually where they were suggesting that people with aphantasia don't have truly hallucinations. And I was like, wait a minute, what? So it caused me to try to rethink about all my past experiences and be like, was I really, wait, what was going on when I was at that that beach watching the foam go down and the okay, so anyway, also I'm the type of aphantasic which I think I have dreams, so maybe I could have had some pure psychedelic hallucinatory. Anyway, it really threw a wet blanket on my whole like, oh, I think I know what's going on around here. Um, and made me rethink a lot of this stuff and go, huh. And then I can't remember those experiences as well. And now I think I'm making stuff up about them. And yeah, so then I guess the only solution is gotta take some mushrooms now. No, I'm just kidding. I've done that in years and years and years. But coincidentally, I did see a discussion with Homie, the psychedelic guru guy, talking about how it's important to take psychedelics. And I did have a time in my life where I thought everyone should take psychedelics, and that did reveal important things. But I'm now thinking, was it all just conceptual stuff? And No, I mean, anyway, so this is totally distracting, not off the point, but something I've been thinking about. But I mean, for my own view, yeah, I don't know. So, and I love to read too, and I never noticed anything weird about when I read. I feel like I get sucked into books just as much as anyone else, but I'm not picturing stories in my mind as far as I can tell. Um, but so could people have mental imagery that they don't introspect? I think that's a serious possibility, and there's reason for thinking that that's true. Um, for example, aphantasics seem to take the same amount of time to do mental rotation tasks, blah blah blah, as any all these. So all the kind of same stuff that comes up empirically seems to come up empirically as well with the aphantasics. But also, when I talked to Eric Switchgable recently, he suggested that we don't really have good evidence for this aphantasia stuff, and I kind of went and looked into that, and I don't know. It's it's hard because Eric's kind of point is that the people who take themselves to have vivid imagery may not be actually correct. So I don't know what to say about that because I sort of feel like I know I'm not correct. But I asked my 8-year-old son about this, and he said he could picture an apple as realistically as you please right in front of him. And then he can draw that apple, and he draws good apples. I mean, so um, I find this stuff extremely confusing. For my own sense, I really feel like I can't picture something introspectively, but I feel like I'm doing something when I'm asked to imagine something. So maybe that's a kind of unsymbolized thinking. I don't know. And I have the experience, by the way, um, of sort of feeling like I have thoughts or at things that come all at once, as opposed to being serially parsed out. Or even like I'll think something which I feel like I understand it completely, but then I have to try to put it in words, and then it's like slowing down. And how do I parse it into the words? So I is that unsymbolized thinking? I don't know. Um, in the sense of thinking without any mental imagery. Uh, my own experience suggests that the answer should be yes, but I don't really know how serious to take that. I think that you have to kind of take both the inside perspective and the third person perspective. So I think there is some evidence that people who think of themselves as aphantasics probably have representations that are image like. Um, whether that means that they are not introspecting those things or that it's a kind of overflow, which I know there was this guy who had that view, and I tried to get him to come on and talk to me, and he said yes, but then it never worked out. But he's an interesting guy. He's like some young computer science genius dude who then went to Oxford. Is very fancy. I don't know what happened to him, but he had the view that maybe it was a kind of overflow, and I think that's a possibility. Maybe it is. So I don't think we really know at this point how the aphantasia stuff works or what the right way to think about it is. Um, and in my own case, I feel like the auditory stuff's a lot stronger um, than the uh, visual stuff. One thing I was trying to think of is like when I was young, did I have this problem? I don't. Has this been always how I've been, or was there a time when I could image things? Maybe it was that time I fell off my bike. I don't know. You feel like you should know these sorts of things, but one doesn't. Um, yeah. So I agree with what Stephen's saying here that it's an interesting empirical question, and if there is unsymbolic thinking, then it might support someone like Pitt's pure thought of cognitive phenomenology. Yeah, and that's kind of what what I was going for actually when I said that sometimes I feel like these things come all at once, and then you have to figure out how to put them in the words or something like that. But there are times when I feel like I'm thinking very fast, And then I feel it serially happening very fast where I'm thinking, oh, and then this, and yeah, and then this and that. But then there's other times where it feels like it just like, oh, there's an idea, and it's this whole thing that pops out in a way. And then you have to like try and capture it in terms of words. I have that feeling sometimes, like when I'm writing, actually, when I'm thinking about things in philosophy. And also when I'm asked to imagine things, I feel like someone says, imagine this thing. I kind of do something internally, but I don't know what it is. And it certainly doesn't seem like picturing something, but who knows? Yeah, and I'm very open to the pure cognitive phenomenology thing from Pitt. So absolutely, yes. Um, if there isn't unsymbolic thinking, what was that? Say that again. Huh. Pea soup. It's delicious. Okay. So, I mean, I've been trying to convince people that the overflow argument is interesting and worth taking seriously, even if you have different views than mine on it. But I don't know. I find it hard. Sometimes people, it's hard to even motivate the problem. Um, People tend to think that maybe there isn't anything um, anything really substantial hanging on it. But I see what you mean now. Well, I think you could fail to introspect your mental imagery in one of two ways. So one way it could be there and then be there unconsciously, and then therefore not introspectable, or it might be there consciously and therefore not introspected. So it could show up. This is something, I mean, Block seems to assume that if you represent something in an imagistic way, then it's going to be conscious. He like almost directly assumes that in the papers where he wrote, in his book too on this. So, but I don't know what the reason for thinking that is. Even if you thought that any kind of imagistic representation had to be conscious, it might be conscious in, according to higher order theory at least, in different ways, like different aspects of it you become aware of in different ways. So that wouldn't support his overflow argument, since what overflows it's got to be something phenomenological. But if this is the way it turned out, then there would be an image. You might be aware of just one part of it, but the imagistic representation of which you're aware of just one part might not have all those other parts be conscious in the phenomenal sense. So I think that, in the case of aphantasics who are performing this task and doing mental rotation, and you can show that they have the same amount of delay time as like a person who says they're imaging it, that might be evidence that this person has a kind of imagistic representation of the thing and is rotating it in their mind. But it's not evidence that that imagistic rotation is phenomenally experienced, but just not accessed, since it may simply be not experienced and still just done unconsciously, in other words, and still performed just as well. So I don't think the existence of unsymbolic thinking or not, or these kinds of things support the overflow one way or the other. You need further, you need more to zoom out further. And well, this is kind of the point of the whole mesh argument from Block, is that no single case is going to win the day, but you have to look at the overall swath of evidence, the mesh. And the only point, I agree with that, by the way, that's the way I think you should get out of this puzzle. The only thing that I have tried to argue in my own work is that there are at least two consistent meshes, the first order one and the higher order one. And we haven't got to the point where we can really see the reasons for preferring one over the other. Yeah. Okay, so good. This is fun. I'm seeing that maybe people are eating lunch or thinking that I should eat lunch because they're stopping to asking questions. So Yeah, maybe. How long have we been going for anyway? 15 minutes? No, that can't be right. Oh, much longer than that. Okay. I don't know. I got a couple more minutes, but probably will be wrapping up. I want to say, first of all, thanks for everyone for coming by. I was feeling pretty ornery when this started, but now I'm not because of interesting conversations. Today has been a stressful day, like I said at the beginning, but now um, some pleasant distractions thinking about that philosophy of mind stuff that we know and love. So I appreciate people who come by and just chat and ask these questions. I guess I forgot to set the Zoom up. No one asked for a Zoom. Normally, I would have a Zoom for people to come and face to face talk to me, but I forgot to do that. So next time I will. But or I guess no one cared because no one said where's the link. But anyway, I do want to say I appreciate people coming and asking these, even if people are challenging or talking smack about me. I still appreciate it. So I learn a lot every time I do one of these, and I appreciate that. But I'm gonna try and do these more regularly on Mondays, like I've said. Blah blah blah. Other than that, I guess I'll catch you on the next one. Um, I'm kind of stalling to see if there's any last minute questions, but it doesn't look that way. So, all right, guys. See you next time.